Hey guys, Ryan with Planted in Truth. So as you know, when we started this podcast, it was based on a Sunday school series that I taught a couple of years ago on apologetics. But one of the things that we've wanted to do is we wanted to dive into some interviews to give our brothers and sisters the opportunity to share their testimony. Now, a couple of words of caution. Number one, some of these interviews are going to be diving into more mature themes. We're going to be discussing some sexual immorality, alcohol and drug abuse, possibly suicidal thoughts. The purpose in this is not to glorify or condone or condemn any particular sin. Number one is that we want people to see that if they're trapped in these circumstances, that there's hope in Christ through faith. Second thing, we're also going to be interviewing people outside of our own faith tradition. This includes Lutherans, Baptists, Methodists, Catholic, even Eastern Orthodox. The whole point is to share their story of coming to faith, and we may discuss why they chose the particular denomination that they did. Again, this is not to condemn or condone any particular faith tradition, but just to give our brothers and sisters the opportunity to share their story of coming to faith.
Welcome back to the Planted in Truth podcast. I'm Pastor Rob. With me today we have Ryan, of course, my co-host, but also a very special guest, one of our elders, Clyde Burchett. And Clyde is here today to share with us his testimony as well as just a little bit about himself, his life story, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. So, Clyde, why don't you tell us about yourself a little bit?
Okay, well, I've had people ask me to tell about myself, and I basically tell them I'm the most ordinary guy in the world because there's really nothing special about me, or I don't feel that there is. I grew up in the church. Mom and Dad, if you ever watched Leave It to Beaver, that's where I grew up, and always went to church. And there were 5 of us kids. My brother went to got a degree at Manhattan Christian College in ministry. My older sister got a master's degree from Manhattan Christian College. My dad was a trustee at Manhattan Christian College. My next younger sister got an education degree, dual degree at K-State and MCC, and I sang. I went to K-State, but I sang in a gospel quartet at MCC where we went around and went to different churches all over the Midwest and sang at youth groups and rallies and things like that. So I've always been involved in the church. I was actually baptized when I was about 13 years old. I knew before that I wanted to be baptized, but I was also painfully shy as a kid, and I didn't want to stand out. I just wanted to stay back in the woodwork and not draw attention to myself. But we had a youth pastor. His name was Doug Ingmeyer, and Doug was as energetic a guy as you could ever imagine. And it was hard not to get excited about stuff when Doug was around. And we lived in a small town. Our church probably had 15 or 20 junior high school age kids. And after Doug had been there about 6 months to a year, we were probably running 60 to 80.
Oh, wow.
And And as a matter of fact, rumor around town was that some of the competing ministers were about ready to run Doug out of town because their youth programs just plummeted. But Doug was excited about his faith, and it was very contagious. And so Doug baptized me when I was 13, and I already kind of knew what was expected of me. I knew the examples that my friends and my family had set, and as a result, I didn't have a lot of the problems. I've never smoked, never drank, never done drugs, you know. I stayed out of trouble. And it wasn't until many years later in my life that, sorry, I got sick. And my doctor, he said, you know, you're a tough guy. He said, if you were not in the shape and in the condition that you were in, we wouldn't be having this discussion. And so for all those years, I just thought I was boring. I just thought, you know, yeah, you're supposed to be good. That's what God expects. That's what your family expects. That's what your parents expects. But there's payoffs. And I didn't realize that for 40 or 50 years. And then it kind of comes crashing home.
Yeah, kind of drives it home. So
yeah.
When you were growing, did you grow up? So Cedar Grove is a Restoration Movement church.
Correct.
Did you grow up in the Restoration Movement?
Yes, that's kind of an interesting story too, because my dad was raised Methodist, my mom was raised Assembly, and you know, you've got Assembly of God. So you've got the real staid, denominational, sit in your pews, read and recite out of your book.
Yeah, very liturgical.
And then you have your Pentecostal, speaking in tongues, prophesying, Assembly of God. And I remember the first time I went to a Sunday night service at my mom's church. I bet my eyes were that big around. I was standing in the back looking, and what are these people doing? You know, when I was growing up in the Christian church, you know, when it was time to pray, you folded your hands and bowed your head, and everybody was silent. Well, they were all up and down in the pews, and it just almost sounded like they were they wanted God to hear them over the guy next to them. And, you know, they were really going to town. But when my mom and dad got married, they went to Oklahoma A&M back then, and Dad said they rented a house and said the first guy that knocked on the door was the minister from the local Christian church, and he invited them, and they went, and they stayed with the independent Christian church. And like I said, Dad was one of the trustees at Manhattan Christian College for years and years. So we've got pretty deep roots, I guess I would say, in the independent movement. I played Bible Bowl in high school. my kids play Bible Bowl in school. My grandkids play Bible Bowl, and sponsored through the Independent Christian Church. And my kids, two of my kids, met their spouse through Bible Bowl and the Christian Church. And my brother, several of his kids met their spouse through Bible Bowl and the church. And so it's more than just an individual thing. I would say, for the Burchett family, it's kind of a generational thing too.
Well, and that's the way, that's the way that you were raised, and you raised your kids in similar, if not the same way. I mean, I'm sure there's generational differences there, obviously.
Right.
But, now, has Becky always been?
Becky was raised Baptist, and for a while she was in the her kids were baptized in the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And then she had kind of distanced herself from the Catholic Church when we met, and I think, the Independent Christian Church's restoration movement obviously has some Baptist background, and so it was a pretty good fit for her, because that goes back, kind of to her beginnings, and she was very comfortable with the restoration movement.
It was an easy transition. It wasn't like going from an independent church to a Pentecostal or charismatic church,
or Methodist,
or
or even any high church.
Yeah, any of the high church.
More liturgical.
Yeah. I honestly, as long as I know you, had no idea the background there with your parents was a melding of Methodist and assemblies. That had to be interesting.
It is. I have to say that the assembly side of the family, my mom's side of the family, has remained much more active in the church. I have a number of cousins and second cousins and once removeds, out there that are very much involved in leadership, pastorship roles. I've got a couple of second cousins that also have done quite a bit of missionary work and actually run an orphanage in India. So we've got quite a bit of international ties there too.
Wow.
So when did you move over into this area? Because you grew up in Kansas, correct?
Correct. Once I finished graduate school, I got a job in Tennessee, and I moved to Tennessee in 1982 and was down there for 3 years. We went to a number of different churches down there at the very beginning, and basically there was Disciples and there was Non-Instrumental Church of Christ, and not much in between.
So
And
two extremes of the restoration movement.
so we had two extremes of the restoration movement that I had never experienced, and so we had to decide, and we wound up going to the Disciples Church for about 2 years. And then when it's kind of funny, the company I was working for, I'd applied and got a new job up in this area, and so I'd spent weeks driving around looking at houses. I looked in Odessa, I looked in Marshall, I looked in Warrensburg, Sedalia, I looked Clinton, everywhere. And we were still living in Tennessee at the time, and it was a Friday afternoon, and I was driving up 13 to get to I-70 to go back to Tennessee, and I saw a for sale sign on a house, and I thought, hey, that looks like what I'm looking for. So I stopped, turned around, went back, and got the realtor's name, and took off, going back up to 13 to I-70. And about a mile north of this house, there was a sign by the side of the road, says, "Come glorify Jesus, Cedar Grove Christian Chuch," and an arrow. And I thought, man, if that's not a sign, I don't know what is. And so when I got to Tennessee, I called the realtor, set up an appointment, went and looked at the house, called my wife and said, I found it. This is the place. And so the next thing I did was drove out and started looking for that church, for that sign that I'd seen. And when I drove down here, the old song about the little church in the dale, and I'm like, this church could not be more off of the beaten path if they tried. But, I said, well, this looks like a very viable option, and we as soon as we closed on the house. At that time, I just had 2 kids, and so we came. Matter of fact, as we were moving into the house, I think we had 3 or 4 people from the congregation stop by and welcome us into the neighborhood. So we'd already kind of decided where we were going to go.
Yeah, I think God was maybe pulling you, maybe not kicking and screaming, but very, very forcefully helping you in a specific direction, I think.
Yeah.
So when you first started coming here, we're a relatively small church now. How many people were attending here at that time?
At that time, it was probably not much different than it is right now. Relatively small. Of course, we had none of the additions were on yet. Basically, we just had this room and downstairs, and there were 2 kids in the congregation, and a smattering of older people, and at that time, the majority, there were probably 3 families that everyone was related to. At one point.
Different than it is.
Yeah.
Than it is now.
Yeah. And over time, the congregation grew. Several of the people who were here had, back in the day, you had 4 to 6 kids.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of those kids had left, and they started coming back. Well, those kids now had kids, and so it wasn't but early 90s, and we couldn't fit everybody in here. Actually, we built the addition there in the late 80s, the first addition.
You're talking the overflow?
The 2-story, yeah, the overflow and down below.
Fellowship hall.
Yeah, and then in the early 90s, then we built the lean-to on past that. So when basically everything from the south wall there has been added since we had been coming. But at one time, we were running 140, 150, 160 people a Sunday. And I know one year we had over 100 kids in VBS.
Oh, wow.
And we had to have a bus to bring kids
To get them all here.
Mm-hmm. And so, we see a lot of generational changes. My kids are up and out, and they've moved on, got jobs, live in other places, but they're all very much active in the church. My oldest daughter and her husband met at the Christian Campus House at Rolla. They don't have kids, but they're pretty much mom and dad to probably 100 to 200 kids within their church over the last couple of years. They're very much involved in youth activities. Mason, my oldest son, has a degree from Ozark. He's has a preaching degree. He never took a full-time preaching job, but the church that he's associated with now over towards the city is it's I guess you'd call it an independent Baptist, but it's kind of Baptist background, but it's not associated with any of the Baptist groups. But he's very much involved in that. He says, basically, if somebody's not there, he gets to fill in for everything. And he's preached a number of times for him too when the minister wasn't available. And then my youngest son and his wife, they homeschool all of their kids, and they met through Bible Bowl, and she has started a Bible Bowl team with one of my nephew's wives, and so now the grandkids are involved in the church. So
awesome.
It's been a very, very good generational continuation.
Yeah,
I would say.
And I would say that's kind of one of the strengths of the church, and should be one of the pulls of the church. Nowadays, we're seeing a bit of a return of particularly young men to the church, and a lot of them. There was this falling away kind of in the 90s, late 90s and 2000s. And so a lot of these younger men never grew up in a church. And I think we're kind of seeing the consequences of that with, the condition degradation of the family here in the U.S. particularly. And it's not just the U.S. I mean, you go to Canada and Europe, and it's the same thing. It's kind of the degradation of the family. But right there, you see what happens when, your family, you raise your kids in the church and teach them, biblical, godly principles, and that's the result.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I've noticed over the years, I mean, like you said, you look around, we're in a postmodern world. People don't think, they need the church. We look at outside of the U.S. in a lot of the European countries, different places, they have forgotten what evil really is. And they have forgotten how active Satan is. And those of us raised in the church have been able to avoid a lot of the problems that Satan causes. We've been able to avoid a lot of the death and destruction and disease that Satan causes. But I think as we go through, like you mentioned, a lot of young men have tried to figure out what their role is. And as soon as Satan was able to separate men from their roles, he was able to work that much easier. Yeah. The old cliche, Satan's greatest trick was to convince the world that he doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And the world has operated on that assumption for probably the last 40, 50, 60 years, maybe 100 years.
Yeah. And to a certain degree for, the past, since man was created. So
yeah.
To a certain degree.
Yeah.
But I think that, seeing, I know for me personally, having someone like you in the church is reassuring that, this walk and raising my family in that way pays dividends long term. And it's easy, it's real easy to just fall into the traps of the world and be, preoccupied and just consumed by, I need a better house, or I have to have X, Y, or Z, or I need to, success is defined by what the world says versus, no, this is what success looks like. This is what a good, successful, this is what God wants for our life, is to glorify Him and to raise our children to glorify Him as well.
That absolutely, and again, keep using the cliches, but we've got to keep the main thing the main thing. And why are we here? We are here to praise God. We are here to have a relationship with God. And if we take our eyes off of that goal, then it's so easy to focus on ourselves. And I was just thinking about this the other day. My dad was the oldest of 10 kids. My mom was 8th out of 11. My brother had 8 kids. He's got one son that's got 9. My youngest son has got 6 kids. Well, the world today tells you that's crazy. You can't afford to have kids. But when we look at the Bible, when we look at our purpose here, That's our purpose, is to have kids and bring them up in association and in a living relationship with God.
Amen.
And it's not the fact that I've got $10 million in the bank, or I've got 1,000 likes on Facebook, or I've got 100,000 hits on my YouTube channel. That is, as Solomon said, vanities of vanities.
Yeah.
That is total inward focus. And I think that, like you mentioned, particularly with young men, we have taken the focus off of young men and their contributions and the responsibilities that young men have, because, I hate to say it, but we have such a consumer lifestyle. We have such an easy way of life in the United States right now that, there are young men, and I say young, some of them are pushing 40, 50 years old now, that spend 30, 40 hours a week playing video games. What could they be doing with those hours?
Yeah.
Where could they invest those hours in God's kingdom?
Yeah.
And, we say, oh, well, we don't have enough time, or, we're busy, but what it is we're not focused.
Yeah. We want to be distracted.
Correct. We seek distractions.
We'll have time for the things that we want to make time for. I think you brought up a really good point. You were going through the list of how many kids you've had, how many kids your brother Daryl had, and how many kids his son has, and how many kids your sons have. And let's be honest, that's not something we talk about a lot in the church anymore, about the fact of having a family and having kids. You look at, we were talking about the attendance of Cedar Grove in the past versus now. Well, part of that is, as a congregation, we've gotten older, number one. Number two, people have moved. But if you take that umbrella and you widen that out to the church as a whole, why are church attendances dropping? Well, part of the problem is we're losing out to attrition because we're not having kids like we used to. Now, that's setting aside, of course, anybody that has a medical issue that prevents it.
Or makes a conscious decision not to have kids.
Right.
There are people that, maybe they have a legitimate reason and decide, we don't want to have children, but there still should be opportunity for them to disciple within, children within the church. Look at your son-in-law.
Yeah, well, we see that here at Cedar Grove. We've got kids that come in on a bus ministry that we're not for. I know for a fact Clyde invests quite a bit of time into a couple of the kids himself, that if he had not, they wouldn't have a Christian-like father figure. But I think we also have to be careful, though, because how do I put this? We as a group, as Christians as a group, we don't have the same emphasis on having children that other world religions do. And that can be problematic. I was reading an article where they were talking about the fact that the reason why Islam is growing so fast is not because of their converting and their discipleship.
They're actually losing more through conversion, but they're gaining. But they're gaining
just simply by birth rate.
Yeah.
Which, I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but it definitely shows a pattern, because here in the United States, what was the average kid size of how many kids you had per family if you were having kids, versus now
2.5, I think, is the last.
2.5, 2.3. We're rapidly approaching the point of non-replacement. And again, I hate to bring politics into this, but Satan does at every opportunity. Because, again, like I said, it used to be that, a man's riches was gauged by how many sons he had, how many kids he had. And that was, a full quiver. That was how society decided how rich a man was, the number of offspring. And now Satan has twisted that to where we have convinced ourselves that we can't afford to have kids. And you look at all of the things that Satan does, to prevent us from having children. And, there's, overpopulation. We do not have overpopulation in this world. I would venture to say that there are virtually, I don't think anyone has actually starved in the United States. There are people that don't have all the comforts. There are people that don't have everything that they want. But starvation and poverty is an arm of politics. It's not reality. And we have, we've made some inroads on abortion, but we were told, all these poor people can't afford to have these kids.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yeah.
And so as Christians, we have to go against the world, because the world is controlled and governed by Satan.
And I think, I was thinking while you were just talking about that we talk about, and it's been a topic of conversation for at least the last year, about how young men are returning to the church. And I think that as that continues, which I pray that it does, and I think it probably will, I think that one of the outcomes that we can expect to see from that is that return to maybe not necessarily the families of old. I don't expect, my son, for instance, to have, between 12 to 18 children.
Right.
If he does, great. I'm more than happy to pack my house full of kids. But, at least do more than what our culture has just come to accept as the norm.
Yeah.
To understand that if all you have is 2 kids or 1 kid, fine, that's great. If you have more, fine, that's great. But it's more about whatever God blesses you with, but being willing to live that within the church and raise those children, because it has that compounding effect. Mm-hmm. It's not even necessarily so much about how many kids we have that we're raising in the church, but you also have to think about, okay, if I have 2 kids and I raise them in the church and they maintain those godly principles, how many kids are their kids going to have? And then, 100 years from now, how many of my descendants will be in the church, will grow up in a godly life and,
right.
Raise their own children in the same way. But we've had such a long period now at this point, you think probably post Great Depression at a minimum, of smaller families. The family has consistently been declining. And you look at what happened in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s with single mothers and just kind of men abandoning their post and leaving their families to the world, and this is where we're at.
Absolutely.
So how long have you been an elder here at Cedar Grove?
I've been an elder probably 30 years,
Oh, wow.
I would say.
And how many other elders? Because right now we have two.
There are just two. I think the most I can remember in my time was 4.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think, I can think of more men who served as elders, but I don't think they were all on the board at the same time. But I would say 4 at the same time was the most.
So from your perspective, we know kind of what the role of the elder is, but what is, from your perspective, what's the role of the elder within the church?
The role of the elder, I think, is to be the spiritual guardian, and to, unfortunately, over the years, I think the eldership was almost an honorary title. And basically, you started off as a member, and then at some point, somebody taps you to be a deacon. Well, if you do a good job being a deacon, then at some point, you get tapped to be an elder. And unfortunately, there are people that are not qualified to be elders, that really don't seek that role, but yet fall into that role because they've been asked to.
Yeah.
And it is it's a difficult role because it takes action. And, just like you said, we're all so busy and everybody's got things that going on. And one thing that I've noticed is as you look around, not just in the church, but in civic organizations and different things, you tend to see the same people in spots of leadership, in a number of different avenues of their life. And I really feel that God has raised up certain people as leaders. And I know a lot of people with military background will argue, well, we can train a leader.
Leaders can be made.
Yeah, leaders can be made. But in my experience, there are people that others will follow. And there are people that others will not.
Yeah.
And I think God prepares people for different roles. As an elder, and Tim and I have talked about, we would really like to see within Cedar Grove a kind of a reassessment of spiritual talents of the members. And I think that one of the biggest roles the elders have is to help the members find their spiritual talents. I mean, there's a lot of people that are probably good at certain things. They just don't know it. They've never had the opportunity to serve, or they've never had the training for them to take the skills that they have and improve them. And I think that is is a real opportunity that we have as an elder is to make sure that we know what our spiritual gifts are, that we have developed those spiritual gifts, and that then we have a mechanism to put them into action, that we have a ministry where those traits and those talents can be used. And if we do that, there's so many other things that I think go away, because now that person sitting in the pew, they know what they're good at. They know what the people around them need, and they know that it's their responsibility to deliver that to them.
It'll make them, help them to be, not make them, but help them to be more active in the church and kind of as a result, more active in their own faith.
Correct.
Because we're commanded not to go out and get people to sit in pews and come to church. That wasn't the Great Commission. It wasn't,
Exactly.
Hey,
Exactly.
People to come to church.
No, let's go and make disciples.
Go and make disciples. And I think the best way to do that is exactly through, what you and Tim are talking about, in that, what gifts do we have within the church already, rather than looking, outside the church when we have a need. We can go within the church and give that individual the opportunity to put that skill, to put that talent into use. And the best way to grow is through adversity. And part of that adversity, I think, is conquered and challenged through whatever skills, abilities, and insight that we may have as, within the body. You look at just this podcast, I never really considered I am not a very sociable person, as you all know. And so, but I have a love for apologetics, and I have a love for just having conversations with people, more in a private setting. This has honestly taken me a little outside of my comfort zone, but a little, yeah, just a touch. But, knowing that this is one of my strengths, and apologetics is kind of one of my strengths, and talking to people is a strength, when those opportunities come up where the church needs something along those lines, I'll call Ryan. You got a question about X, Y, or Z, hey, let me call Ryan. Let me put you in touch with him. Or whereas like, for instance, let's say we need to replace a light in the church. I am not going to be the person that needs to get the phone call. I mean, I'll try. If you call me and say, hey, we've got a fixture that needs to be replaced, can you do it? I'll be like, well, I'll try. I know a little bit. But, I know that there are other people in the church who are much better equipped, trained, and ready to do something like that.
Right.
And that translates out into the community as well. When we have somebody, and we've had it happen, where somebody has a need at their own home, and we've had people from the church that will step up and go and help them do whatever it is they need to do. Mm-hmm. And that's living their faith. That's what we're called to do.
Yeah.
It's almost like if we follow God's design and plan for the family and for the church, and for how we use the gifts that He's given us to do ministry and serve one another, things just work. It's kind of bizarre how that works out. Yeah,
it's funny. It is bizarre. I mean, not really. It's explained. And really, the church is just like a family.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Here at Cedar Grove, you and Tim would be, kind of the father figures of the church, in that it's your responsibility to, make sure that the church is staying on track doctrinally. And when those uncomfortable times where church discipline needs to come up, well, that's the father's role as well.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And that's, as men have abdicated that role, again, we go back to, that's how we get into the situation culturally that we're in now. But I'm kind of encouraged that we're seeing a return to that. And, we have leaders like you and like Tim that are shepherding and leading the church family the way it should be.
It's interesting, even though Cedar Grove is a small congregation, the body of Christ has tendrils or roots or fingers everywhere.
Yeah.
And to me, it is so amazing how that I run into people that have a similar background. Or, when I first started coming here, we had Bert Fitzgerald was a deacon, and Francis was the pianist organist. Well, her youngest son's name is Dennis, and Dennis was named after Dennis Messmer. And Dennis Messmer is the brother to the lady that played the organ in the church I grew up in. And, I get down here, and Doug Ingmeyer was the young man that baptized me. And we started having some youth rallies and going down to Northside, taking the kids down there. Well, who was the preacher? Randy Ingmeyer, Doug's brother. And so, every time I turn around, there are people that I know or I have association with, or I can, as soon as I meet them, we've got an instant rapport. And we were at a Bible Bowl tournament years ago, and was down at College Heights down in Joplin. And I was going around with our team, and there were just kids and sponsors everywhere, hundreds and hundreds. And I'd walk by, and I saw this lady. And, we went like that in the hall, and, I walked by and I looked at her, and I thought, I should know her. And, 2 or 3 times later, I walked by and I looked at her, and all of a sudden, it just, my head exploded. She was the team captain from Dodge City, Kansas, that won the National Bible Bowl competition like 4 years in a row, and was really good friends with my sister. And our team was kind of a wannabe. I mean, they thumped us, like an old rug every time we played them. But, and I had to stop her, and I couldn't, and I said, I'm sorry, but I know you from somewhere. And she said her name, and I'm just like, oh man. Wow. It's a small world, yeah.
Here you are, a couple 100 miles from where you grew up.
Yeah, there she is, and she was there with her team and her kids, and they were continuing that tradition within their household.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, about 30 years as an elder. Wow. I can't even, we've been going to church here now for, 10 years, 11, 12 years maybe.
Probably, yeah.
Pretty close to that, I think. So, unbelievable. So, you had mentioned, and obviously we know about it, but you had gotten sick several years ago. Kind of what happened with that?
Well, I came down with necrotizing pancreatitis, and within my family, we have a bad habit of having a very high threshold for pain. And you think that's great. You think, I'm tough. And, but, pain has a purpose, and pain is there to tell you that something's not right. And my not long after I got sick, my brother called, and he said, "Hey, describe to me your symptoms." And I told him, and he said, "Well, he was in a lot of pain now, and he had gone to the doctor, and they took some x-rays and did some MRIs and stuff." And he had stage 4 kidney cancer, and had no symptoms till it was too late. And I'd always joked with him before, when my daughter, the Friday before my daughter got married, right here, he was out mowing the grass because the family was coming in, on Saturday and for the wedding, and he managed to fall down and stick his foot up under the lawnmower and cut off 3 toes. And so I drove him down to the hospital, and I said, "Doesn't that hurt?" And he says, "No, it doesn't hurt." And I thought, man, he's worse than me, because I had all my fingernails and a finger tore off in a combine one time, and I'll guarantee that hurt. But kind of a long story, but when I got up one morning, and I wasn't feeling good, and my stomach was hurting, and it was real high, and I went in, I thought, well, I'll just sit and watch TV for a minute or two, and I thought, I just got indigestion or something, and it'll go away. Well, it didn't. And so I asked my wife, I said, "Have you got, do we have any Pepto or anything like that?" No. I said, "Well, I'm going up to the warehouse, and I'll stop at Walmart and get some on the way to town." So I went to Walmart and walking back through the parking lot, chugging Pepto. Got to the warehouse, and Mason was there, and we had an intern from UCM that was working with us, and they were doing something, and I just could not get comfortable. And I was standing there for a while, and then I was leaning up against a pallet of seed, and then I kind of laid back over the seed, and then I sat down on the seed, and pretty soon I just kind of melted and slumped down, and I was laying on the floor. And our intern walked over, and she looks over the top of me, and she says, "Do you want to go to the hospital?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I do." And so they took me to the hospital, and they took a blood test, and they gave me x-rays, and they said, "Well, this, whatever the figure, is supposed to be in the 40 to 60 range, right, and yours is 600 and going up." And so it hit like 1,800 before they could do anything. And they finally told me there down at the hospital, they said, there's nothing more we can do for you here. And they were able to get me over to St. Luke's. And so I went to St. Luke's, and they said, well, you've got, at that time they just said it's pancreatitis. And they said it's one of the, really one of the most painful things you can get. And the first question that they ask you is, how much have you had to drink? And I said, I haven't had anything to drink. And they go, well, how much do you drink? And I said, I've never had a drink. And they said, well, how come you have pancreatitis then, And so anyway, I spent 3 or 4 weeks in the hospital, and they sent me home. And they said, well, right now there's nothing that we can do for you except try to manage the pain. And I went home for about a week, and then it just got so bad I had to go back. And I went back in the hospital, and they did more tests, and they said, well, what you've got is necrotizing pancreatitis, and that is where your pancreas produces digestive enzymes and insulin. And the digestive enzymes, the common duct between your gallbladder and your pancreas that goes into your intestine to digest your food, well, that had gotten plugged up. But I'd never had any symptoms, And so anyway, basically my pancreas digested itself. And we were, I can't remember, it was in December when I went back in the hospital. And it was horrible being in the hospital and just laying there in pain and I never knew a person could hurt that bad for that long and still come out of it. But you couldn't sleep, you couldn't get comfortable. The nurses were coming in all the time and taking vitals and everything. And about 2 o'clock one morning, they came in to take my vitals, and I pretty much didn't have any. And so, it was time for the blue light special, and all the bells and whistles went off, and they come in with a crash cart and give me a shot in the heart, and they got somebody up there squeezing the ball, breathing for me, and take me down to ICU and hook me up to I don't know how many machines. But the next morning, they laid me open from there to there and cleaned out all the infection and inflammation they could, and the doctor he was telling me, he was reenacting and said, yeah, we took your intestines out and we laid them on the counter, and then we would clean them and abrade them and inspect them as we put them back in, and they did that for 2 days. So I was wide open there for 2 days, and then they finally closed me back up. But that's when the doctor came in, and he said, man, you're tough. He said, most people your age don't last this long. And they said 30% of the people that come into the hospital with bad pancreatitis, he says 30% don't make it out. And 30% of the next 30% make it about 2 years, and the next make it 3 to 5 years. And I'm working on 9. Yeah. So I feel incredibly lucky.
Well, I don't think luck had anything to do with it.
I think blessed is more.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that's, we were kind of talking before we started recording that, it's not just you being blessed, but it's God worked through others to, bless you and to bless them,
Oh, absolutely. The doctor, he was, he did just an excellent job. And he told us, he says, I'm gonna make you one of our success stories. And he said, I don't know what it is, but he said, when I look at your MRIs, when I look at your test results, when I look at your numbers, your blood tests, all this, he said, normally if I see this, I go down to intensive care, to see somebody like that. He says, I don't go up to a residential room where, some guy's laying in bed talking to his family. Mm-hmm. He said this is not right. And, I had obviously Becky there all the time. And she only left a couple of nights. And Donna and Rita and a couple of ladies from church, spent the night while Becky could go home and do some things. And, I have no recollection of that. And so, I was blessed by so many people, and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
And, that's just, I think that's just God working in mysterious ways.
Yeah, very obvious yet mysterious ways.
Yeah, mysterious to me, obvious to everybody else.
Yeah, and I can remember the conversations at that time, while you were in the hospital of, okay, I'm going to go up and sit with Clyde so that Becky can, go home, take a shower, or go home and you almost, in a situation like that, you don't want to feel like you're pushing somebody out, but at the same time, you have to recognize that they need a break as well. Yeah. That stress of caring for somebody else, basically 24/7.
Oh, absolutely.
Huge toll. Yeah. A huge toll. My grandpa, my pawpaw, he had pancreatic cancer, and he, about very similar to you and your family, very high pain tolerance. He wouldn't really admit that there was anything wrong until it was pretty much too late. And he went on hospice, and he spent, I don't recall now, maybe a month on hospice. And my grandma was there taking care of him pretty much day and night until she finally had to, let a nurse come in and help. And it was very obvious the toll that it took on her.
Oh yeah.
So it's good that we had our family, my aunts, my mom and my aunts would come and spend time and help, and it's the same principle. It's family that steps up and takes care of each other. Right. Is there for each other. And that's just the kind of culture that and I'm sure we're not the only church that is like this, guarantee it. But that's one of the reasons that I love the church here, because it is that family atmosphere where you almost feel obligated. I don't know if obligated is the right word, and I'll use it, but I use it in a good sense. You feel obligated to help take care of the people around you in the church. Right. And I can remember specifically some of those conversations, particularly in the board meetings, discussing what we were going to do and how to help and things that, people were doing or were going to do to try and help. So.
Well, yes, and some of those discussions, they may have sounded more at the time more business focused, but it was like, okay, when, and one of the things we kept saying was when. It was never if, it was when Clyde gets out of the hospital.
Yeah.
We can't have him doing this. We can't have, and that's where a lot of the discussion about, you know, what to do with the farmland came up, because we didn't want you overdoing it and overextending yourself. I think while you were in the hospital, and I don't know if you remember this, but I think one of the greatest scenes of just men of God coming together was we surrounded your bed in the hospital, the elders, the deacons, and myself, and we just took turns praying over you. I should say elder or 10 because you were in the bed.
Yeah.
Not knowing what was going on around your home. And we just prayed over you. And it was just like, you know, this is what the church family is about.
Yeah.
Loving one another and praying for one another. And that was a scary time. And I know it was scary for you, but I mean, just as a church too, it's just like, wow.
Well, it was scary for me to a certain extent because, again, I think God was taking care of me, because my doctor would say a lot of things, but he was always very cryptic in the way that he said them. And it wasn't until sometimes a year or two later that I put everything that he told me together and figured out, you know, exactly what he was saying. But, you know, he came in. And one time he came in and he says, "Man," said, "you're tough." And there was one other time he came in and he says, "You're sick." And we talked a few more minutes, and he says, "You're really sick." And he said it 3 times before he left. And I'm thinking, He must be slipping. He forgot. He told me that 3 times. I don't know what, I don't know what he's up to.
The importance wasn't quite sinking in.
Yeah. But see, I wasn't smart enough to know I shouldn't get better, because I had all the support. I had never had anything like this happen to me in the past. God had always taken care of me, always blessed me. You get sick, and then you get better. Then you go on. And to me, that's the way this was supposed to be. The fact that, well, there was about twice that, basically, if those nurses hadn't have been walking, doing their rounds, I probably wouldn't be here.
See,
and that never clicked for me.
I'm going to challenge you on that. and I'm going to challenge I wasn't smart enough. I think you were not just standing at death's door, you were standing inside the threshold. You had knocked on the door repeatedly and it had opened. But I think that the Spirit was telling you, you're just visiting. And that's why you had the peace to know that you're going to get better. You've gotten sick before and you got better, no different here. And I think that's because the Spirit was, maybe not audibly, or maybe it was audibly, who knows, I don't know, but was impressing on you that this is just a visit. It's not permanent. It's not your time yet. That's hard for us because we're so kind of temporally tied to where we're at. We always live, yesterday was one moment, today is another moment, tomorrow will be a different.
Yeah. And
it's hard for us to wrap our minds around eternity. But to face death like that, and to still have that peace, that can only come from a solid basis in faith and from the Spirit directly.
Amen.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And one of the things that I guess I really kind of struggled with after I got better is that, you know, I always felt like that I was doing a pretty good job of living God's plan for me. And then having gone through this, I'm like, you know, God's given me a reprieve, and He's given me a do-over. And what is it that I need to be doing in this do-over time? I call it my bonus years. So what is it that I'm supposed to do in these bonus years that God's given me, and that, you know, all of the people in my church family and my family made possible? And, you know, that's really a humbling thing, because you know, it could have been any number of other people that got that reprieve, but I was the one that did.
Well, kind of on that note, as I think we'll probably start wrapping up, what would you like to see for the church, our church body, and how do we work to accomplish that? And then on top of that, or in addition to that, or alongside that, what do you see, what's something that the church can work on, the church universal, cross-denominational lines? What can the church work on, do you think, to accomplish maybe those same goals or similar goals?
Well, I think, obviously, the first thing that we have to do is have the goals. And in order to have the goals, we need to assess what the needs are. And so as we look at Cedar Grove, as we look at the church universal, as we look at the world, what are the needs of the people? And then we have to look at, you know, how do we mesh those needs? How do we coordinate those needs with God's plan for us? Because I do think that our culture, I think our affluence has just thrown us so far out of whack with what our needs really are. And we have become such a pleasure and convenience society that our needs, our actual physical needs, are very few and far between.
I agree.
And we spend, as a society, we spend the majority of our focus on our wants and our conveniences.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to draw a distinction between those, because again, I think that's where Satan is able to work so well, because you know, you look across history, and you know, we have a healthcare crisis, in the country. Okay, what's killing people? High blood pressure, heart attacks, cancer, strokes. You go all the way down through there. These are the things that used to only kill the king, because the king was the only one that could afford the luxuries and the food that gave you all of those things. Now, the biggest problem we have in the poverty ranks is obesity. And so we have overdone the physical to such an extreme, and we've completely negated the spiritual.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say completely, but we've very much discounted the spiritual needs of people. And people try to use the physical to supplement and supplant the spiritual.
Yeah. So it would be safe to say then that what we really need to focus on, kind of within the church, and again, globally really, is identifying those spiritual needs, not just within the church, but within our own communities, within our own states, countries, worldwide, is
right.
Focus on those spiritual needs, and some of those physical needs, actual needs, not the wants necessarily, but the physical needs will sort themselves out.
Oh, absolutely. I think if we get to a point where, like I said at the beginning, we were created to have a relationship to God. Our job is to glorify God. Our job is to give honor to God. That is why we are here. If we, in everything that we do, if we ask ourselves, okay, if I do this today, am I glorifying God? If I go out and party too hardy, am I glorifying God? If I overeat to where my cholesterol is up to here, am I glorifying God? No, I'm not. So if we do the things that we need to do to glorify God, to magnify God, to honor God, if we ask ourselves, am I honoring God in every single one of my activities, I think you'd be amazed at how we can shrink a lot of our problems and society's problems down.
At least make them less of a problem.
Oh, absolutely.
We're probably not going to do away completely with them until Christ
because
comes to
we live in a fallen world,
yeah.
and that's another thing. Here's your next topic. Okay. We live in a fallen world, and society has decided that through physical and political means that we can create heaven here on this earth. And that should be our goal, is to create this utopia here on this earth. And that's not what God said. God said, I'm preparing a place for you over here. And you're here to get ready to go over here. That's heaven. This is not heaven.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's a pretty good place to.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to wrap our conversation to an end. Well, Clyde, we want to thank you for joining us for this episode.
Happy to do it.
I really appreciate your testimony and the wisdom that you've shared, and I look look forward to hearing your communion meditation next time you do one. I think you just got yourself a whole list of ones to go through for the next couple of weeks.
I think we've got maybe the rest of the year.
I think he's golden. I think maybe he needs to fill the pulpit one of these Sundays and go to town.
Oh, I can give you a lot of ideas, but
I know you can't. I might just have you preach a Sunday or two and let you get all that out there. But we thank you all for joining us, and Ryan and I will be back with another interview in the future. We're going to be doing these a little bit more frequently, just to get opportunity to talk with various people about their faith and what it means to them and their testimonies and some of the observations they have about the church and the direction the church is going, or maybe the direction the church should be going. As always, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.